Live your life within the moment. And don't go wait until the morning. You never know when it is over. All that I know is we'll get older. So let us dance this night away.
Hi everyone, and before we begin, please listen to the following important public service announcement from the Honorable Judy Heumann. Judy is the former United States Assistant Secretary of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services in the Clinton administration and the former U.S. State Department Special Advisor for International Disability Rights in the Obama administration. Recently, Judy starred in the Netflix documentary Crip Camp.
Hello, my name is Judy Heumann. I'm here today to encourage you to please take your COVID vaccine. And if you have friends and family that haven't, please encourage them also. COVID is to be taken seriously. In addition to taking the vaccine, please use other protective methods. Wear a mask, use gloves, and sanitize frequently. If you need additional information and you live in Eastern Oregon, you can contact EOCIL. Thank you, and protect yourselves and the community.
And I'd like to welcome everyone back to Voices in Action, a podcast by Eastern Oregon Center for Independent Living, a global disability resource and advocacy center. And I'm your host for this season, Rojas-Perez. And over the course of seasons 2 and 3, we're going to be covering a variety of topics that relate to EOCIL's core priorities, which are as following: disability actionable research, disability independent living community services, HIV prevention and harm reduction services, and various others. And if you would like to know more about all the individual services and programs that we offer, I encourage everyone to check us out online at eocil.org or visit one of our local offices in Ontario, Pendleton, the Dalles, and LeGrand. So we will be talking with individuals with lived experiences, leaders of global and local advocacy organizations, and people who are responsible for developing and implementing policies that affect our daily lives. And we're going to be learning from each other along the way. And just before we start, I'd like to share some information about our risk and discomfort. So during this episode, we're going to be talking about complex and prolonged trauma that can profoundly affect physical, mental, and behavioral health outcomes across the lifespan. Talking about stress, emotions, and experiences of adverse and traumatic events may be distressing to you. Some items we will be discussing are very personal. They may upset you, and you may find triggering. Listeners' discretion is advised, and if any of these topics or subjects do affect you, please know that you can reach out to EOCIL, where you can talk to a professional counselor in a safe and welcoming environment. Thank you. Richard, I'd really like to thank you for being here and being a part of this episode and talking about the service and program you have. If you want to give people a quick introduction about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. I loved your introduction. But yeah, my name is Richard Rojas-Perez, and I'm the Assistant Director of our Outreach Services here at EOCIL. I am from Eastern Oregon. I wasn't born here, but I grew up here from a very young age, and I went to school at Eastern Oregon University and kind of stuck around. Started with EOCIL soon after that.
Okay, and what were you studying there at Eastern Oregon?
Yeah, so I double majored. So I had a fun little mix. So I studied music, and then I also studied sociology. So I majored in both.
Okay, and then what kind of led you to the position that you are right now? Like, have you always were you always the assistant director, or did you come
Yeah, no,
join
so
EOCIL differently?
so after college, I feel like every other person was kind of looking for somewhere to go. So kind of just like my first, not real job, but my first full-time job. And so I learned about EOCIL through a friend of mine, that they had offered a harm reduction specialist position to them. And so they had just started a job. So they passed it on to me, and I reached out to Crescencia, our director for our HIV prevention services. And I started as a harm reduction specialist with EOCIL in Union County. And then I think this position opened up, the assistant director. This was kind of a new program that we were starting, and I applied for it, and now we're here.
Oh, that's great. And how have you been enjoying your time then? Starting this program and working as an assistant director.
It's been wonderful. I mean, it's come with its challenges, especially here in Eastern Oregon. It's come with a lot of learning, but I love learning from, there's been wonderful peers and wonderful people to learn from. So it's been really good.
Yeah, and have you ever thought of yourself doing work like this? Like, have you ever thought it was a chance that you'd be being put in position as assistant director, working with outreach services, dealing with people who inject drugs, people who are at risk of contracting HIV? Was this ever like a thing that crossed your mind growing up, or?
I think definitely, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I started college with just music. So I sung in a choir, and I was taking a lot of my courses that were related to music, but I knew that that's not what I wanted to do. And so I took some sociology classes and I completely fell in love with just the advocacy aspect, learning about society and how a lot of issues that we face today are systematic. And so it crossed over with EOCIL because I just really cared for the community, and that's what I wanted to continue to do. So it just kind of fit perfectly. This position kind of does that. We do a lot of advocacy. We do a lot of reaching out to a lot of minority groups, making sure that needs are met out in the community. So this is something that I always wanted to do. I love advocacy work. I did a lot. I was the director for diversity, equity, and inclusion at EOU, our student government. And so that kind of plunged me more towards like this advocacy type, community health type of work.
Okay. Yeah, no, and I like to ask that just so like the people get to a sense to know, why it is that you're doing what you're doing, because a lot of people you hear are only doing it because it's a job. They're getting paid to do it. There's no real emotion, there's no real care for the people that we're trying to help serve. And especially since you are the assistant director of outreach, you're out there essentially kind of promoting, but educating the people, educating the community, not just like community members, but also other organizations, getting out there because you care, because this is something that means something to you. And for people to, get a little sense of why it is that you're doing it makes it all the worthwhile. Because I know I personally, I wouldn't want to go to someone who doesn't really care about me. They're just doing it for a paycheck, especially with subjects that are so sensitive and so important to individuals. Going to someone that doesn't really care about you, they're just doing it for a paycheck, you're just a client, you're just a number to them, is really just intimidating and just not. I personally wouldn't go to someone. I would try to find someone who actually cares, who actually wants to help me, who wants to, you know, help me along this journey. So, and I kind of,
Definite.
yeah, and I kind of hinted to kind of like some so what do you do? But if you can kind of like break down exactly what it is, because this episode I want to make it about your program and the work that you're doing, because it's really important. It's some of the first steps into getting treatment, into getting a medication, and it's life saving and life changing to many people. So I really wanted to give you the opportunity to share what it is that you do for those that aren't aware or aren't familiar with this topic. So if you want to give, a rundown of what it is that you do as assistant director of outreach services.
Definitely, I can talk a little bit just kind of about what our program is geared towards. So, with the HIV outreach program, we really focus on helping people find and accessing HIV testing, whether that be through us, our harm reduction department, um, navigating the cost and navigating the access to both PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, and PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis, and then referring them to the correct services after we test people. That could either be just kind of more sexual health counseling that we provide, or if we have a test that is reactive, then we do a warm handoff to our Ryan White HIV services.
Okay, and how are you getting this information out to the people?
We
Is
do
it just like on the street talking to individuals? Are you going to different organizations, posting up flyers, or how are you making sure that this information is reaching, the mass community?
Yeah, yes, and is what I would answer to that. So we do a lot of outreach events, public health outreach events. So events that are for the community to know about resources. We participate in those where we have an outreach team that goes out and ensures that that information is getting across to people. In that sense, we have different social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook as the HIV prevention, EOCIL HIV prevention and harm reduction services. On Facebook, social media. We also put ads up on different dating apps like Grindr. We're working on some other dating apps as well at the moment, but just finding different avenues, different school events, even a lot of times too. We are also reaching out to part of what we do is helping the community, but also reaching out to clinics to ensure that we have PrEP providers in the area. We reach out to pharmacies to ensure that there's both PrEP and PEP access. A lot of times we see those discrepancies in Eastern Oregon. So we're just trying to close that gap and trying to give more access to folks.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, especially here in rural Oregon, where we don't have a lot being offered, especially if someone is interested in PEP and PrEP or getting on some HIV medication, they have to travel as far as Portland. So for someone who lives kind of central Oregon, that's a good ways to go. Or even if you live in the northeast part of Oregon,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
closest spots is Portland or Boise, Idaho. You have to make these long travels that some people just simply can't do. They don't have the time because of travel costs, because of work, because of disability status. There's so much that goes into it. And I know we ran into the problem because I do some outreach work in terms of like HIV. When I go out there, I let them know, especially for the people who inject drugs, they're at risk of contracting HIV, especially from needle sharing or just unclean areas. So we inform them of all the options that are made available, but realistically, there's not a lot here in Eastern Oregon, and that's kind of like the work that we're trying to change. In
Yeah.
terms of getting people onto the PEP and PrEP, where do they go? So if I saw your guys' ad online and I was curious, I would call a number, or I assume I'd visit you guys online.
Yeah, you can either fill out an information form online through our website. You can call any specific office or just like the main phone number, and they can definitely direct you to the right place. So when someone um, comes into our office, per se, they have interest in HIV testing. We'll take a brief kind of history, a brief intake, and we can do our testing through our services here. And then depending on results, we can head different directions, right? So if we have a non-reactive test, we provide counseling and information around PrEP and PEP on what it is. Pre-exposure prophylaxis is a medication that you can take daily, and it prevents the HIV infection. It has about a 99% efficacy rate. So that's a really, really good efficacy rate. So we inform people. And then at the moment, we don't have a lot of providers here in Eastern Oregon that will provide PrEP. So we help them access telehealth. And accessing telehealth is really great for people out here in Eastern Oregon. It's a lot more private. And so in rural areas, you have issues of anonymity. You know, your pharmacist could be your mom's church friend, or your nurse practitioner, or your doctor could be someone in the community that you know. And so it could be difficult for people who don't want a lot of people knowing. So we refer to telehealth services. We help them get signed up. And it also another great benefit about telehealth is that you can get PrEP at a much quicker rate, right? Instead of having to wait for a PCP that in Eastern Oregon, but I feel like in all areas, it can take up to like 8 months to get into a PCP. And so if you want to be taking care of yourself, you want to be just taking care of your health and you want to get on PrEP, that can be a barrier. And a lot of times someone can be like, oh, that's just too difficult. I'm not going to wait 8 months to get something that's preventative, right?
Yeah.
Um, so so accessing telehealth is really important, and that's what we help folks on. Um,
Yeah, and
if for
I know you touched on it. You said that the reason we use telehealth is that there's not a lot of providers out here. Why is that we're having such troubles with it? Because I know, as far as my position, it was to find providers, ask them like why, like what have you found out and like doing your outreach as to why? Because I assume that you go to many of these places and you're asking them kind of, do you have PEP and PrEP? Do you provide that? If not, why is it like, are we not
Yeah,
having trained personnel to have it? Do they just not want it? Is it like religious reasons? Because I know a lot of hospitals come from like a religious background, so that's why they don't provide stuff like that. Um,
yeah. So we've run into different things, right? I think the biggest overarching theme here is just lack of information.
mhm.
Some providers may think that um, PrEP is not a necessity here in Eastern Oregon. So kind of providers having their own biases, but a lot of times it just kind of takes someone to ask, right? A lot of times we face when we're doing cold calls, we'll have people not know where to direct us or kind of really not know what's going on. But that's where we come in. And then there's also just providers that didn't realize that it was a need or that was somewhere where they were lacking, right? So we connect providers that are interested to the Oregon AIDS Education Training Center, because we don't, I'm not a medical provider, so I'm not providing any medical information, but I am connecting them to folks that can. A lot of stigma, right? So I think, yeah, those two are overarching things are just lack of information. So people not knowing about PrEP,
Yeah,
providers, doctors, nurses. I think that's one of the biggest surprises that came to me when I started this job is just like, oh, okay, I'm gonna talk to these providers and they're at least gonna know what PrEP is. But a lot of times I'll go and talk to people and they think that PrEP is like an HIV medication, which it's not, it's a preventative medication. And so those are just kind of the challenges that we face. But we sometimes we do see providers and they realize that they're lacking in that sense and they connect with the AATC and they start off programs. I think that's what's happening right now in some of our counties where clinics are realizing since we've been kind of contacting them and getting them connected, they're like, oh, this is a need in our community. But that's what we see a lot with just I feel like any issue or something that a big population that we work with is the LGBTQ community, specifically the MSM community, so men who have sex with men. And so I think there's some stigma towards that community that prevents a lot of information to be received.
yeah, absolutely. And then for those, 'cause I know we've been talking about it. Just in case someone isn't familiar, do you want to kind of explain what PEP and PrEP is for those, and
Yeah,
kind of what the intention behind those medications are?
yeah. So they're a little different, and I briefly explained PrEP, but
Mhm.
like I said, PrEP is a daily medication that there's a couple of options actually. So the most common and the most used one is the the daily oral pill. And it's a little pill and you take it daily. And the really big thing about that is adherence is really important in order to um, build up your system and help you fight if you're in contact with HIV. And so you take it daily and it has a 99% efficacy rate. It has to be prescribed by a doctor. So you have to get a prescription. It's not over the counter. And then PEP is post-exposure prophylaxis. So if people have had an encounter or are concerned about an encounter with HIV, then it has to be within 72 hours. They can go into an emergency department and start a PEP regimen, which is also HIV preventative medication that stops the virus from multiplying in your body. The efficacy rate for this one can can really range, right? So it's much lower, depending on how quickly you access the medication, and that's why it's really important that we're reaching out to pharmacies, right? That's another kind of part of this whole thing. But just to finish explaining PEP, it's different because you have to go to an emergency department, and you have to start it within 72 hours, and the efficacy rate for that is different as well. So when people come in here, and they're interested in HIV testing, that's one of the questions we ask is just, do you have a concern of a recent exposure to HIV? Because then that we probably don't want to do HIV testing, or we don't want to counsel. I mean, yes, we counsel on PrEP, both PrEP and PEP, but then they're the emergency there, and what we want to do is get them into an emergency department to start a PEP regimen.
So as you were explaining kind of the significance of going in to get tested, especially after like exposure, is because the effectiveness of that medication wears down over time. And that's like a big thing that we want people to know. That's a big part of the outreach, is educating not only the organizations, but the communities, letting them know that if you are exposed, that there is a time frame that you need to get in there to be on this medication to help better your chances of not contracting HIV. And whether that may be through the MSM community, it could be dirty needle sharing of syringes, it could be even from a mother to a child during birth, blood transfusions. So there's a various ways that it can spread, and you have such a limited amount of time once you find out that you've been exposed to get into
Yeah.
treatment, to go to the ER and find this medication. And that's like a big thing for us too, is if there is an ER that doesn't carry this, why aren't they carrying it? It's our job to make sure that all these areas are well, yeah, people have
People have
access to this
access,
information,
accessible.
to
Yeah.
these things. And just educating the population about what it is that we do and why it's so important to have providers that provide PEP and PrEP, why it's important, what it's used for, who's it intended for, who might it benefit in the long run. And so going on from there, I just kind of wanted to cover that because those are such important medications that are really life-changing for a lot of people.
Definitely.
But
Yeah.
so for an individual, if they were to come in and get an HIV test kit, you know, it comes back positive. So if I were to go in there, say, I'm putting myself in an example here.
Mhm.
If I were to come in there and I say, hey, I want a test kit, what's that looking like? Because I know some people don't want to go into a professional clinic or professional setting
Mhm.
because it's intimidating. Maybe it's your actual like personal health provider that they're gonna know that you're going in
Yeah.
there for an HIV test, and maybe you feel embarrassed, maybe you just feel discouraged for whatever reason, you don't want to go in, so then you don't get tested, which isn't a good thing. You should be, wanting to get tested. It's for your health. So if I were to come in, what does that process look like? Who am I talking to? Am I filling out long paperwork? What information do you need from me?
Yeah. So we do need kind of just like basic information, kind of like name, um, address, and stuff like that. But that's just kind of information that we need for our intake. You take a really quick intake. It's just kind of for your HIV test is just filling out. We want to make sure that you're taking an HIV, like kind of what I was talking about, making sure that the concern wasn't a recent exposure, because then those steps have to be really different. When people do come in, that's the big benefit, right? It's not a very scary doctor
Yeah.
setting. And we kind of walk them through the process of what the test looks like, after we do that initial intake and those questions, and what what the test is. The big difference about our test is the third generation test. So with the third generation test, it goes back about, I believe, so it goes back a full 3 months. So if you were exposed to HIV within those 3 months, that test is not the most effective. And so that's why our intake is important again. So we inform them about, the efficacy for the test. There's a different concern about a more recent exposure, then we would probably refer them to either PCP or just different public health services that can provide a blood test. Because a lot of those blood tests and most tests that you're gonna get at a clinic or through mail-in testing, finger pricks, those are all fourth generation and they go back 3 weeks.
Okay.
And so there's a concern then that's what direction we would
And is
head.
it free of charge
But the
for me to go in and get a test kit?
absolutely. All of our services do not include any charge that comes to us. If you have health insurance, then that can come in handy with our PrEP and PEP navigation. But we don't require anything with our services, and that's also a big benefit for people who don't have resources to, I mean, that's a luxury, right? Getting tested, getting all of your health needs, and here, at least it's a luxury for many people. And so we want to make sure that we don't have barriers for folks who want to get tested. And then the test itself, it's want to make sure people haven't drank anything in 30 minutes prior to taking the test, but it's just a quick oral swab. So you swab once at the top of your gums and then again the bottom of your gums, and you get your results in about 20 minutes. So if people are testing positive with their results, then we provide kind of just that initial counseling, making sure that people don't receive these results alone, and then we refer them to a confirmation test, so a blood test with their PCP or urgent care department or public health department to kind of ensure that the test was correct.
Because everything's subject to a false positive or false negative as well.
False positive. Yep. So when people do test positive, they get their confirmatory test, and then it's a handoff. It's a warm handoff to our Ryan White services. And then from there, if people are testing negative, then we can talk about different, like I said, different sexual health counseling. So talking about different barrier methods like condoms and dental dams. We carry both internal and external condoms for folks. And then, just talking about PrEP. PrEP is a great option. And if people decide to start on PrEP, then, like I said, we can refer them to telehealth, or if they're already well established, into their PCP. I would love for everyone to have a PCP and get their PrEP through a PCP, right? Because like I mentioned before, adherence is so important. And so when we have people just using telehealth services, then there's not that big follow-up from their prescriber. When people enter into our PrEP navigation, then we follow up, we make sure people are adhering to their medication. That's a very important part. Because adherence is so important. I mean, the medication only works if people are adhering to it. So we follow up 7 days after their initial prescription to see if they received their medication, if they've been able to take it. We follow up, I believe, a month after, 2 months after, and up to 3 months. And if people want to be in our program a little longer, then we can. But it's just ensuring that they have someone that is there to be on their side and to help them take their medication.
As kind of like someone coming in that with no knowledge of this, but also another big component of it is the confidentiality of it all. All of our information is confidential. We don't share anything with anyone.
Yep.
We even go as far as to, if you want to take the test here at our location, we can get you a little private room. where we
Yeah.
can have the test performed, which is just an oral swab, and then we can await the
Yep.
results there. It's never going to be an instance where you're taking the test in front of X, Y, and Z amount of people. It's a very because it is a personal
Yeah.
thing to do.
Yeah.
And especially if the
Definitely.
results are to come back positive, you have every right to disclose that information with whoever you want, or if you don't want to, absolutely, you're right. We are in no position to tell anyone that they are required to take this test in front of just random people or other clients that we might have in our office building. So it's completely confidential work that we do here. Um, so going along that track, if I were to come in and I do take a test, it comes back positive. You said we're going to my PCP to get blood work drawn. It comes back positive, a confirmed positive now. Walk me through the steps. Where am I going? Is it over for me? And I hate to use that, but I'm kind of being like the devil's advocate because you hear a lot of people, and especially out in the like out on the internet, the misinformation, the stigma that once you have HIV, it's over. Like, so me playing devil's
Yeah.
advocate,
Yeah.
if I get that and I think, is it over? Kind of what are you, how are you proceeding with that?
I think there's a couple things here, right? That's, I think, one of the biggest barriers that people who work in this HIV field
Yeah.
have to face is just stigma and misinformation. A really quote that I love about a person who's living with HIV, a drag queen from Mexico, but she said that her HIV is not her sentence, right? The stigma and the views that society has on people living
Mhm.
with HIV, that is her
Yeah.
sentence, right? And so we do a lot in our outreach, in our education, when talking to providers to fight that stigma. One of those pieces is U equals U, right? Not a lot of people know about this. And I mean, I wasn't very knowledgeable about it before I entered the field, but just knowing that people who do test positive, we refer them to our Ryan White services. Our Ryan White services takes care of um, kind of making sure that they are starting their medication. And the medication out today is wonderful. It can be a pill, it can be an injection, um, and it provides people a fighting chance, right? It's not a death sentence that it was in the 70s. We don't see that
Yeah.
today as much, and that's what we like to tell people about. People can live a very normal life with HIV today. It's a chronic disease. It's not a death sentence any longer. So we let people know about just the options and letting people know that U equals U. So once they take their medication, they become what's known as undetectable. And so when someone becomes undetectable, they become untransmittable. So there is no way that there's 0% chance. And I say zero because that's what it is. I've spoken to doctors who use that, and it's backed by science. And it really helps fight that stigma
Yeah.
as well, right? There's 0% chance of um, acquiring HIV from someone who is
Yeah.
undetectable.
And
Um, and that could be through sexual contact, and just different things like that.
yeah,
Um,
and when
and
we say
so,
undetectable, we mean like the viral load within someone's blood blood
yeah,
can be
yeah.
detected.
So yeah. So when people go in for blood work after they test HIV positive, part of that blood work is just kind of like reading the viral load in their blood specimen. And so a lot of times that viral load can be high, and that's what is kind of
Yeah.
spreads, right? So when people get on the antiretroviral therapy, which is HIV medication, then that viral load becomes so low in that blood sample that they it can't be read. And so once that happens, then people are untransmittable.
Yeah, because we also don't want to make the misrepresentation that it cures it,
No.
because you still have it in your system it just
Yeah.
reduces the viral count within your system to an extremely low level that it's undetectable,
Yeah.
untransmittable. And
Hmm.
that's a lot of things that you can hear. It would be nice if it would cure it, but we also don't want to give false hopes saying that it cures it, that it's gone forever.
No.
You never have to worry about it, which just isn't the truth.
Nope.
It has to be something that's maintained, especially with our case management. That's what they're for. Kelly Ramsey, the director, that's what he does, is he's a case
Hmm.
manager, and that's where you would send someone. So again, putting myself in that position, I come back HIV positive.
Hmm.
You're telling me all this information. We get blood work drawn. You're handing me off to Kelly Ramsey, right? Is there
Hmm.
anything else that
His
goes
program.
along that, or is that kind of like the end of your chain of command?
Um, I mean, we always like to stay in touch with people, but at that point, then it goes into our Ryan White services, and those are the folks that can help the best with people's needs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So after that, we're not doing any official check-ins, but um, it's a small community, so we check in with folks, but there's no official check-ins after that. We're kind of just that initial part where we're outreach and we're finding folks and referring them to the places that can best help them.
Oh,
That's what our
awesome. And
program.
is there a particular group of folks that you're reaching out to? 'Cause I know a lot of our services we focus on the people who inject drugs. Sometimes we'll focus on the underserved, the marginalized communities. This program, this outreach services that you're providing, is it kind of, are you help or educate a certain demographic, a certain group, a certain ethnic, like, is there a certain group of people
A
that you're
certain
trying to reach?
community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, when we think about it, HIV affects all communities.
Hmm.
And so we always keep everyone in mind when we're working on outreach. But there are communities that are more heavily affected by HIV, right? Because of other systematic disparities, because of other systematic issues. And until we address those issues, we're going to have different groups, different communities, different minority communities that are more affected by, I mean, we saw it during COVID too. I mean, Hispanic and Black people were more heavily affected by COVID. And we see the same thing with HIV, where both the Hispanic and Black community are the communities that are most affected by HIV. And that could be because of different reasons. That my computer doesn't die. But if it does, I'll have to join back on.
That's all good. But yeah, no, that's great, because you kind of hinted at, I was trying to, get you to say, so to say, is that it
Yeah.
doesn't just affect one group. It is something that
Yes.
affects everyone. And that's some of the misinformation, going back to it. Some of the stigma is that
Mhm.
HIV is only part of the LGBTQI community. It's only part of the minority communities, the Hispanics, the African Americans, the Latinx. It's only a part of
Mhm.
these XY groups. And that's not the case. It's something that can affect anyone at any time throughout their life. Some people are born
Yep.
with it without even knowing until later on. Some
Mhm.
people can contract HIV later on in life without knowing. So it's something that
Yeah.
affects everyone. Uh, and that's some of the misinformation that, and especially a lot of the hatred for the LGBTQ community, is the misinformation that they're the ones spreading it, which is just not the
Yeah.
truth. It's something that affects everyone
Yeah.
in all
No,
facets
HIV
of life.
definitely does not discriminate when it comes to that. But we do see those groups that are more heavily affected. So we
Yeah.
focus our outreach in reaching those groups, or just ensuring that our outreach is accessible to those groups. So that means doing outreach events in Spanish. That means reaching out to different community leaders and informing them of the resources available to their community. Um, that means going to the clinics that are more accessed by these folks and ensuring that there is PrEP prescribers and that there is PrEP available for them in these communities. Um, all of those things are things that kind of build up that help.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can only do so much. And I encourage everyone who's listening to this, and it might feel a certain way or moved and want to partake in this, is go into your local pharmacy, see if they have this stuff available. Go to your provider if you feel comfortable, your PCP, to see if they know what PEP and PrEP is, to see if they actually provide it. We can all do a small part, which can make a big difference in the work that we do. So I
Yeah, I mean,
encourage
just
everyone
starting
to
a conversation, just starting
absolutely.
a conversation. A lot of it is just, I mean, who brings up HIV in a dinner conversation? Not many people, but just starting a conversation, talking about it, it definitely helps fight that stigma.
Hmm.
And that's what people can do every day is educating yourself about HIV, what it looks like today. A lot of the information that we did receive is outdated. I mean, I think the last non-job HIV information I got was back in high school. Um,
Yeah, and
and
I know personally, I've never once talked about HIV ever. Like even in high school, we might have touched on it like one time, and that was it. It
Mhm.
wasn't until I got into the job position that I actually educated myself on what HIV. I had heard of it before. I thought it was a life, it was a death sentence. I was like, if you got HIV, it turns into AIDS, your life is over. It wasn't
Yeah,
until I got to this job when I was 22 that I actually was educated and informed about the actual truth behind what HIV is and what it means to be living with HIV and being a person who lives with HIV.
yeah, and I mean, I think that's just the key point, is just making sure people are educated and starting conversations or just starting a conversation with your partners, with your sexual partners, talking about STDs. Like, hey, when was the last time you normalizing testing?
Yeah.
Testing can be a very scary thing for people, but there's resources out there that ensure people can get fully tested. Take Me Home is another service that we refer people to, and that provides more STD testing. So, like a fuller panel of STD testing and HIV testing as well. If people aren't comfortable coming into here for a test, then they can get a test sent home. But just knowing that there's options to get tested, and a lot of times, a lot of these options can be free of cost to the consumer, and so we we like to inform people about their options and encourage people to talk about their sexual health with their partners and starting that conversation.
Okay. And where do you kind of hope that this program that you're assistant director to kind of goes? Like, what are your goals for the program in terms of outreach services and things of that nature?
My hope is to fight stigma, one, educate the community and educate community organizations around HIV and fight that stigma, but also making sure people have access to PrEP. That's one of the biggest challenges in Eastern Oregon is just that access to start the prescription. So I want to make sure that we have prescribers in all our counties, especially in all of the counties we have offices in, making sure that pharmacies are educated and are have medication available for people so that we kind of close that gap between the rural and urban area when it comes to access to both PrEP and PEP and HIV information.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. And I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to sit with me for a little less than an hour to kind of talk about the work that you're doing here at EOCIL. And is there any final thoughts or any key messages you would like to give off to the people before we sign off?
I think just what I've been saying, let's start a conversation, let's talk about it, let's help destigmatize it because this is the work of the community. Our community health and public health is important to all of us. And so I think that we all have a piece to do in there.
Yeah, awesome. And for anyone who has questions, you can find us online at www.eocil.org. We have 5 office locations, one in the Burns, Ontario, which I'm situated at, LeGrand, where
Mhm.
Richard is situated at, Pendleton, and then the Dalles. So feel free to make an appointment to speak with someone. We're more than happy to help inform, help educate, help teach the community. Please share this podcast with anyone that you feel it might benefit spread information. And I thank everyone for joining in. This has been Voices in Action, a podcast by Eastern Oregon Center for Independent Living. And as we close out today's episode, I would like to thank Christine Byrne and the Peace Lutheran Church for their donations that they contributed to EOCIL's food pantry. These donations are instrumental in supporting the water and food security services that we offer in Umatilla and Malheur County. Thank you so much, and we appreciate your donation.